Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we delve into a fear as ancient as the canyons and as personal as the sound of your own name, whispered from the shadows. We speak of the taboo, the Shapeshifter, the Walker of Woe. These are not merely legends. They are harrowing accounts from those who have looked into the eyes of something that was not what it seemed. Prepare yourselves for 5 disturbing, true encounters with the terror known as the Skinwalker. By there has a specific kind of loneliness that only settles in after the 3rd straight night on the road, somewhere deep in the gut of the Arizona desert. The world shrinks to the twin beams of your headlights, cutting through an ocean of black. Be the hypnotic drone of the engine and the crackle of the CB radio. For a long-haul trucker like me, that loneliness is a familiar blanket. But on that night, driving the empty stretch of Route 160 across the Navajo Nation, the blanket felt cold, heavy, and full of static. Bah! I was pushing through to get a shipment of steel to Flagstaff. My rig the only sign of human life for now. The trouble started with a whisper on the radio. It wasn't the usual chatter from other drivers. The airwaves had been dead silent for hours. This was different. It was a child's voice, faint and laced with static, breaking through the quiet day. My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like my daughter, Lily. She was 6 years old and sleeping safely in her bed, 500 miles away in California. I snatch the receiver, my knuckles white. Who is this? Say again. The static hissed. Then, clearer this time. Closer. Daddy, I'm lost. It's so dark out here. It was impossible. A prank. It had to be some sick individual with a voice modulator preying on lonely drivers. But the fear it sparked was primal, a father's instinct kicking in despite all logic. I scanned the darkness outside my window. Nothing but sagebrush and the immense, stardusted sky. Where are you, sweetie? I asked, my voice trembling, playing along with the cruel joke, just in case. I see your lights, the voice whispered, sounding like it was right next to my ear. Please, hurry. I slammed on the brakes. The air brakes hissing in protest, my truck shuddering to a halt. The sheer impossibility of it was making me dizzy. I peered into the oppressive darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the distance, just at the edge of my high beams, something was lying in the road. It looked like a deer, but it was mangled, twisted at an unnatural angle, as if it had been broken and discarded. A wave of nausea washed over me. Suddenly, a flicker of movement to the right of the carcass. A coyote, I thought. At first, its eyes glowing, a sickly yellow in the headlights. But it was too large, and it wasn't moving like a coyote. It loped with a strange, disjointed gait, its back legs moving slightly out of sync with its front, as if it were still learning how to use its new body. It paused, turned its head, and stared directly at me. The air in my cab grew frigid. Daddy, why did you stop? Lily's voice crackled through the CB again, but this time it wasn't just on the radio. I could hear it outside the truck, too. A thin, reedy sound, carried on the desert wind. I threw the truck back in gear, my foot stomping on the accelerator. I wasn't stopping for anything. No. As I swerved around the deer carcass, my headlights swept across the coyote. Pews. It reared up on its hind legs, its form shifting, elongating in the stark light. For a split second, it wasn't a coyote at all. It was a tall, emaciated figure, its skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame, its limbs impossibly long. Its face, I couldn't see its face, only those two burning, malevolent yellow eyes. It let out a sound that was not animal and not human, a high-pitched shriek that was a perfect, horrifying mimicry of a child's terrified scream. Then it dropped back to all fours and began to run, keeping pace with my truck, effortlessly. As I pushed 80 miles an hour, panic clawed at my throat. I watched in my side view mirror as it ran, a blur of fur and lungs. It wasn't tiring. It wasn't falling behind. It was toying with me. "Let me in, Daddy," the voice said. No longer on the radio, but from right outside my passenger side door. A sharp, rhythmic tapping started on the window, syncopated with the pounding of my heart. Tap, tap, tap. I refused to look. I stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel, praying for the lights of a town, another car, anything. The tapping turned to scratching. The sound of claws on metal, a high-pitched shriek that set my teeth on edge. The truck shuddered as something heavy slammed against the passenger side. Poof. "You can't leave me," Lily's voice screamed. But it was distorted, now stretched, and layered with that inhuman, guttural shriek. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't know what this thing was, but I knew the old stories the Navajo mechanics would whisper at the truck stops. They spoke of the Yee Naaldlooshii, the ones who walk on all fours. They spoke of mimics, of things that steal voices and faces to lure you into the dark. B said you should never speak their name, never acknowledge them, and never, ever let them in. Purdu. The scratching and banging continued for what felt like an eternity. I saw the faint glow of a gas station on the horizon, a tiny beacon of hope. The creature must have seen it too. With a final furious slam against the truck that left a massive dent in the door, the sound stopped. I risked a glance in the mirror. Abiz, it was standing in the middle of the highway behind me. Babe, it was on two legs again, a tall, skeletal silhouette against the desert blackness. As I watched, horrified, it slowly raised a hand to its face. And its face, it wasn't a face. It was a warped, leering mask of my daughter's features, stretched and distorted over something impossible. The eyes were just black, empty holes, but the mouth was twisted into a wide, triumphant grin. I didn't stop until I reached Flagstaff, pulling into the first well-lit truck stop I could find, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat there until the sun came up, surrounded by the comforting sounds of other rigs and other people. The side of my truck was covered in deep, long scratches, and the passenger door was caved in. The official report would say, I hit a deer, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I never drive that route at night anymore. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I think I can hear a little girl's voice calling for her daddy. It's a sound that freezes my soul, because I know it's still out there, in the vast, dark loneliness of the desert, wearing my daughter's stolen face, and listening for the sound of my engine, waiting for me to stop. My grandmother's house was a place out of time. A small adobe home sitting on a patch of dusty land near the borders of the reservation. She was a woman of deep tradition and deeper silences, and her only constant companion was a scruffy, one-eyed cattle dog named Kai. Kai was her shadow, a fiercely loyal animal who loved my grandmother with a devotion that was absolute. He was old, arthritic, and gentle, which is why when I went to stay with her for a month to help with repairs, the dog I found there was not the dog I remembered. The first thing I noticed was the energy. The old, slow-moving Kai was gone. This dog was lean, alert, and possessed a nervous, crackling energy. It still had one eye, the same patchy brown and white coat, but its movements were different, too fluid, too deliberate. Kai's got a new lease on life, my grandmother said when I arrived, her voice thin. She didn't meet my eyes when she said it, just kept kneading dough on her flour-dusted table. There was a new lock on the door, a heavy deadbolt I'd never seen before. That night, I was woken by a sound, by a low growl from the foot of my bed. In the sliver of moonlight from the window, I could see Kai standing there, perfectly still, watching me. Pip, his one good eye, seemed to glow with a faint, pale light. It wasn't the warm, intelligent gaze of a dog. It was cold, ancient, and appraising. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I whispered his name, and the growl deepened, a guttural rattle in its chest. Then, as silently as it appeared, it turned and slipped out of the room. The next day, things grew stranger. My grandmother, usually so stoic, seemed terrified. She kept glancing at the dog, then away, her hands trembling as she worked. I watched Kai from the porch as he sat in the yard. A group of coyotes appeared at the edge of the property. A normal dog, especially a cattle dog like Kai, would have gone ballistic, but this Kai just sat there watching them. Peesh. He dipped his head once, a slow, deliberate nod. The coyotes mirrored the gesture and melted back into the sagebrush. My blood turned to ice. It was a communication, a greeting. "Grandmother," I said, walking back inside. "Something is wrong with Kai." She flinched, dropping a clay pot. It shattered on the floor. "Do not speak of it," she whispered, her voice ragged with fear. "You do not see what you think you see. You keep your mouth shut. You do not name it." Her terror was infectious. Ply. I started watching the dog constantly. I noticed how it never seemed to eat or drink, yet it never tired. I noticed how its shadow sometimes seemed to stretch and distort in the setting sun, taking on a form that was too tall, too thin. One evening, I heard my grandmother coughing in her bedroom. A moment later, I heard the exact same cough, a perfect, dry replica come from the living room, where the dog was supposed to be sleeping. I peered around the corner. Kai was sitting up, his head cocked, that single, luminous eye fixed on me. The breaking point came a week later. The smell started first to faint, coppery scent of decay, like an old slaughterhouse that seemed to cling to the dog's fur. That night, driven by a gnawing dread, I took a flashlight and went out to the old, dilapidated shed at the back of the property, a place Kai had always avoided. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Lying in the corner, covered by a dusty old tarp, was a body. It was desiccated, covered in dirt, but I knew immediately what it was. A one-eyed, brown white cattle dog. My grandmother's real dog, Kai. He had been dead for weeks. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling. If Kai was here, then what had been sleeping in the house? What had been watching me? What had been wearing his skin? I ran back to the house, bursting through the door. Grandmother, it's in the house. The real Kai is in the shed. My grandmother stood in the center of the room, her face a mask of pure terror. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking behind me. I turned slowly. The thing that called itself Kai stood in the doorway, but it wasn't a dog anymore. It was changing. Its form was shifting, elongating, its bones cracking and rearranging with a series of wet, sickening pops. It rose up on its hind legs, growing taller, thinner, its fur receding into pale, stretched skin. By its face melted and reformed, the snout retracting, the single eye swelling into a large, luminous orb. The other eye socket was a hollow, weeping black. It opened its mouth, a mouth now filled with thin, needle-like teeth. And it spoke. It spoke with my grandmother's voice, a perfect, chilling mimicry. He knows, it rasped. The boy knows. My grandmother let out a choked sob and held up a small pouch of what looked like ash, chanting in a low, desperate voice in her native tongue. The creature flinched, hissing, its gaze locked on me. It took a single, lurching step into the room, its long, three-jointed fingers twitching at its sides. I just wanted a warm place, it whispered, its voice shifting, becoming my own pride. I just wanted to be loved. It was the most obscene thing I had ever witnessed. This ancient, predatory thing, using my own voice to plead for sympathy as it stood over the body of a loyal animal that had murdered and replaced. My grandmother, through the pouch, burst in the air, and a fine, white powder rained down on the creature. It shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and animal rage. Unstumbled backward, its form flickering between the monstrous shape, the dog, and something else, something I couldn't comprehend. It scrambled out the door and vanished into the night, leaving only the smell of decay and ozone. We left the next morning. My grandmother refused to ever return to the house. She lives with my uncle now, her silence deeper than ever. I don't know what that thing was. Not truly, but I know it was ancient, patient, and evil. It didn't just want to hide. It wanted to be a part of the family. It studied us, learned our voices, our habits, waiting for the right moment to replace us all. I still have nightmares of that single, glowing eye watching me from the foot of my bed. And sometimes, I swear I can smell old, wet dog in decay on the wind. A sign that it's still out there, walking in someone else's skin, looking for another warm place to call home. As a grad student in archaeology, the chance to work a dig site in a remote Utah canyon was a dream come true. Our team of 6, led by the renowned but eccentric Dr. Albright, was excavating a series of pre-Puebloan ruins. But the place was breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly isolated. Our only connection to the outside world was a grizzled Navajo guide named Jose, who brought us supplies once a week. It was Jose who gave us the first warning. On his second visit, he pointed to a narrow, twisting box canyon, about a half-mile from our camp. "Please stay out of there," he said, his face grim. "That is a place for the chindi, for bad spirit. The wind dances there for a reason." We, of course, with our academic arrogance, dismissed it as local superstition. Dr. Albright even chuckled about it. "Folklore is fascinating, but we deal in facts," he'd said. We should have listened. Blur. The strange occurrences began subtly. A trowel left by a pit would be found perfectly balanced on a rock 100 yards away. We'd hear whispers on the wind at night, thinking it was just one of the team, only to find everyone accounted for and asleep in their tents. Then came the dust devils. They weren't uncommon in the canyon, but these were different. They'd form in the mouth of the Forbidden Box Canyon and move with an eerie, deliberate purpose, swirling and spinning as if choreographed. Ben, our team's geophysicist, started calling the phenomenon the Dust Devil Dancer. One afternoon, Ben swore he saw a figure inside one of the larger dust devils at all, shadowy shape that moved with the swirling sand. We laughed it off, blaming the heat and dehydration. But Ben grew quiet, withdrew. He started spending hours just staring at the box canyon, his expression a mixture of fear and fascination. A few nights later, the whispers became clearer. I was jolted awake by the sound of my own name, Sarah, spoken in a perfect imitation of Dr. Albright's voice, right outside my tent. I called out, but there was no answer. In the morning, Dr. Albright swore he'd been asleep the whole night. The same thing happened to 2 other team members, each hearing a familiar voice calling to them from the dark. Paranoia, sharp and venomous, began to slither into our camp. We started eyeing each other with suspicion. Jose's next visit was his last. P took one look at our haggard faces and the nervous way we glanced at the box canyon and simply shook his head. P left our supplies on the ground, turned his truck around and said, "The ground here is sour. It has an appetite." He never came back. But his departure shattered our morale. Ben became completely unhinged. Pehi. Claimed the dancer was visiting him at night, that it would stand outside his tent and whistle a long, mournful, off-key tune. He said it wanted to show him something. Dr. Albright, ever the rash, decided Ben was having a psychological break from the isolation and stress. He confined Ben to his tent, ostensibly for his own safety. That night, a storm of impossible intensity rolled in. The wind howled through the main canyon, and dust devils, dozens of them, spun and raged in the darkness. Put in the flashes of lightning, we could see them dancing with a frantic, malevolent energy. In the morning, Ben was gone. His tent was ripped to shreds, the zippers torn from the inside. We were horrified. Dr. Albright organized a search party, splitting us up to cover more ground. We searched for hours, calling Ben's name until our throats were raw. It was I who found him, huddled in the mouth of the Forbidden Box Canyon, rocking back and forth, catatonic. His eyes were wide, with a terror so profound they seemed to have shattered. He couldn't speak. He could only make a soft, rhythmic clicking sound with his tongue. We carried him back to camp, relieved to have found him alive, though his mind was clearly gone. We decided we had to abandon the dig and get him to a hospital immediately. As we packed in a somber, frantic rush, Dr. Albright put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's a tragedy," he said, his voice full of calm authority. "The wilderness can be a harsh and unforgiving place. It can break a man's mind." I nodded, grateful for his steady presence in the chaos. We loaded the traumatized Ben into our sturdiest jeep. As the sun began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the canyon, we gathered around the campfire for one last meal before leaving at first light. A small dust devil swirled up nearby, and for a second, blinked, and it was gone. "Just the wind," Dr. Albright said, following my gaze. He smiled, a reassuring, paternal expression. But something about it was wrong. It was too wide, his teeth too numerous, too sharp. I looked into his eyes, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. They were the same eyes I'd seen in the dust devil. A luminous, predatory yellow. He saw the recognition, the terror dawn on my face. His smile didn't falter. He simply gave me a slow, deliberate wink. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The whispers in his voice, the escalating paranoia, the focus on Ben. Ben wasn't the one who broke. He was the distraction. The perfect scapegoat. Why? We were all worried about the crazy guy. The real monster had been walking among us, wearing the face of our leader. It hadn't driven Ben mad. It had shown him what it truly was. A sight that had destroyed his mind. And now it was in charge. "Time to go," Dr. Albright said to the group, his voice perfectly normal to be. He looked at me, and his eyes seemed to say, "You will be silent. You will obey. Or you will end up just like him." I am writing this from the back of the Jeep as we drive away from the canyon. Ben is shivering beside me. stoothing wherein Dr. Albright's skin is driving, humming that same off-key, mournful tune. I heard Ben describe, the rest of the team thinks we're heading for safety, but I know better. We're not escaping. We're being led away. We are its new collection. And I don't know where the Dust Devil Dancer is taking us. As a deputy sheriff in Apache County, you see things, disparate things, sad things, and sometimes things that just don't have a box to be put in. The call came in just after 2 a.m. A garbled, hysterical woman screaming into the phone. The dispatcher patched her through to my patrol car's radio. He's not. My husband, she shrieked, her voice cracking. It's wearing his skin. It's wearing his face, but it's not him. I sighed, rubbing the grit from my eyes. Another domestic dispute, fueled by meth or moonshine. Ma'am, calm down. What's your location? She gave me an address for a trailer park 20 miles out. A desolate place off Route 191 known for attracting trouble. As I drove, the woman's words echoed in my head. It's wearing his skin. It was the kind of thing people said out here sometimes. Whispers learned from their Navajo neighbors, stories to scare kids by. The raw terror in her voice had been genuine. I pulled up to a rusty, single-wide trailer. Its windows dark save for a single flickering yellow bulb. The woman, Maria, practically fell out the door when she saw my patrol car. She was a wreck, her eyes wide, her arms covered in scratches. Thank God, she sobbed, grabbing my hand. You have to get it out of my house. Get who out, Maria? I asked, keeping my voice calm and steady. My husband. The thing that looks like my husband, David. I shone my flashlight through the open doorway. A man was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly smoking a cigarette. He looked normal enough, maybe a little gaunt, but that wasn't unusual. David, I called out. He turned, and a slow smile spread across his face. Evening, officer. Sorry about the wife. She gets confused sometimes. His voice was placid, smooth as silk, but his eyes reflected the beam of my flashlight with an intensity that wasn't human. It was like a cat's eyes, a brilliant, piercing gold. I stepped inside, my hand resting on the butt of my Glock. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and something else. Something coppery and rank, like old blood. Maria, why don't you wait in my car? I said, never taking my eyes off the map. She scurried out without a second thought. I walked closer to the man who called himself David. Everything seemed right, but felt profoundly wrong. His proportions were off. His arms seemed a little too long, his fingers a little too slender. When he moved to stub out his cigarette, his motions were too fluid, too precise, like a pre-programmed machine. So, what seems to be the problem here, David? I asked, trying to sound casual. P just gets smiling that wide, unnatural smile. No problem at all, officer. Just a misunderstanding. Please. He mimicked my posture, leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. It was a perfect, unsettling mirror image. I noticed his fingernails. They were caked with dirt, a deep red clay, common to the area. Been doing some digging, I asked. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Just some work in the yard, he said, his voice losing its smoothness, becoming a little too flat. There is no yard. David, I said, gesturing to the rocky, barren landscape outside. Just dirt and rock. He stood up slowly, his tall frame unfolding from the chair with a chilling grace. He was taller than I'd thought, much taller. His head almost brushed the low ceiling of the trailer. The illusion of normalcy was shattering. "You're a sharp one," he said, his voice now a low, toneless rasp. It was as if the human mimicry was an effort he was tired of maintaining. I started backing towards the door. "I think you should come with me," I said, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't hide. He took a step towards me, and another. He wasn't walking. He was gliding, his feet barely seeming to touch the floor. "I don't think so," he asked. I reached for my radio. "Dispatch. I have a dispatch. I have a code for situation state," he interrupted, his voice a flawless imitation of my own. My blood froze. He had heard me talking on the radio. He was learning. I drew my weapon. "Get on the ground. Now," I yelled. He stopped, his head cocked to one side. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, analytical curiosity. He didn't look scared. He looked interested. Then, with a speed that defied physics, he lunged, not at me, but towards the back room of the trailer. I heard a crash, the sound of a window shattering. I ran after him, my light cutting through the dark bedroom. He was gone, just a gaping hole where the window had been. I rushed back outside, weapon raised, scanning the darkness. Maria was still sobbing in my patrol car. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. This thing was smart. It was a mimic, a predator that used deception as its primary weapon. I got back in my car and was about to call it in for real when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the road, just outside the pool of my headlights, a dark silhouette. He wasn't running. He was watching me. He slowly raised his hand and waved, a gesture of mocking farewell. Then he turned and melted into the darkness. The case was officially closed as a domestic disturbance involving hallucinogens. Maria went to live with her sister in Phoenix, but I know what I saw. I started digging into old, cold cases, specifically missing persons reports from this stretch of highway. I found one from a year ago. A fish and wildlife officer named Henderson. He vanished without a trace while tracking a series of bizarre livestock killings. Partner said. The last thing he heard Henderson say over the radio was that he saw a stray coyote acting strange. I can't get the image of that thing's eyes out of my head. That brilliant, piercing gold. I looked up Henderson's file. I found his driver's license photo. My heart stopped. His eyes were the exact same shade of gold. This thing, this stray, en route 191, isn't just mimicking voices. It's upgrading. It's collecting. It's wearing It's wearing a deputy's knowledge, now on top of who knows how many others. And it's out there, walking the night, listening, learning, and getting better at the hunt. When I inherited my grandfather's cabin deep in the Colorado mountains, I thought it was a blessing, a quiet escape from the city, a place to heal after a rough year. Poof. The cabin was old, built from hand-hewn logs, and smelled perpetually of pine and wood smoke. Bye. It also came with a warning, locked away in a dusty old footlocker, my grandfather's journal. His later entries were rambling, paranoid. He wrote about something he called the Hollow Man, or the Cedar Walker. He said it was an ancient thing that lived in the woods, a thing that could wear the skins of animals and the voices of men. He wrote that you could always tell when it was near, because of the smell. Even on a dry day, mixed with the faint, sweet scent of decay. Pye dismissed it as the sad ramblings of a man succumbing to dementia. But a week into my stay, I started noticing things. It began with a smell, a sodden, overpowering scent of damp cedar would fill the air around the cabin. Usually just after sunset, even when there hadn't been rain for days. It was a rich, earthy smell, but with that sickly sweet undertone he'd described. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. Then came the sounds. A faint scratching at the door in the dead of night, like a branch tapping in the wind. But there were no trees close enough to the house. Then the voice, faint whispers from the tree. By one night, I heard it clearly. My mother's voice, calling my name. Jessica, honey, opened the door. My mother had been dead for 5 years. I devoured my grandfather's journal, no longer reading it as fiction, but as a survival guide. He wrote that the creature was bound to the land, a curse laid upon our family generations ago when a trapper had killed one of its young, thinking it was a deformed bear cub. Since then, it has stalked the bloodline, a patient watching horror. It takes what it can. A doe, a deer, a lone traveler. It collects them, studies them. The journal described its pattern. It would watch from the trees, sometimes taking the form of a deer that stood a little too long on its hind legs, or wolf, with eyes that glowed with a human intelligence. It would test the cabin's defenses, searching for a weak point, both physical and psychological. It wanted. One evening, I saw it. I was washing dishes, looking out the window over the sink. A large buck stood at the edge of the forest, staring at the cabin. It was a magnificent animal, but it was unnaturally still. As I watched, its head slowly turned a full 180 degrees to look behind it. An impossible, bone-crunching movement. Then it turned back, its dark eyes fixed on me. It opened its mouth and a sound came out. Not a deer's call, but a perfect mimicry of my father's laugh. A cold, empty sound. Then it turned and vanished into the trees. I knew it wouldn't be long now. My grandfather's final, frantic entry described a ritual of protection, a circle of pure wood ash around the cabin, and a specific Ute prayer for warding, which he had written out. He wrote that it had to be completed before true dark. and that the creature would do anything to stop you. The next evening, as the sun began to bleed behind the peaks, I began the ritual. I gathered the ash from the fireplace and started laying the circle. The smell of wet cedar was overpowering. The woods were filled with a cacophony of voices. My mother begging me to come to her. My father angrily demanding I stop my foolishness. My best friend crying, saying she was lost and hurt. Every voice was designed to break me, to lure me from the circle. I gritted my teeth, tears streaming down my face, and kept chanting the Ute words, my voice shaking as I closed the circle of ash. A profound silence fell over the woods. The voices stopped, the smell faded, the oppressive sense of being watched vanished. I had done it. I stumbled back inside the cabin, locking the heavy door, my body trembling with relief and exhaustion. I collapsed onto the floor, safe. I must have slept for hours. I awoke in the pre-dawn gloom, the cabin still and quiet. A sense of profound peace washed over me. I had faced the monster and won. I stood up, feeling a giddy sense of victory, and walked to the large mirror hanging by the door. I stared at my reflection, haggard, tear-streaked, but alive. I smiled. My reflection smiled back. Its smile was wider than my own. Its eyes. My eyes glinted with a triumphant alien light. And then I saw it, in the reflection. Standing in the room behind my reflected image was the Hollow Man, a tall, skeletal figure made of shadow and bone, its face a featureless canvas of horror. It hadn't been trying to get in. It had already been inside. The whole performance, the voices, the deer, the escalating terror rate was all the show. A grand distraction to keep me focused on the outside, while it hid in the one place I never thought to look, the deep, dark shadows of the cabin itself. The ritual hadn't locked it out. It had locked me in with it. My reflections whined. Terrifying smile never wavered. It raised a hand and placed it on the glass from the other side, as if to hold me there, and from the real room behind me, I heard a soft, dry whisper like cedar leaves, skittering across a tombstone. Mine.